Hey there, everybody. Welcome to That Shakespeare Girl. As you know, here at That Shakespeare Girl, we explore the life and times of William Shakespeare. And the question we're asking this week is, did Shakespeare have a first job? And what was Shakespeare's first point of employment? If you study Shakespeare, even for a short amount of time, you'll find out that there is a section of his life that is considered the lost years. They're the part of Shakespeare's life where we're not really sure what happened. There's not a lot of records provided. There's not a lot of books where people wrote down what was going on. And you really kind of have to piece together to make an educated guess about what Shakespeare was doing during that time. And such was my experience trying to dig in and answer this question for you guys this week, because I really don't know exactly whether or not this was his first job, but I do have something of an answer to this question. First, let me start by explaining to you a little bit about education and kids and how they grew up in and around Stratford in the late 1500s. It was a common practice for kids to be apprenticed out to other homes and families and professions from anywhere from 7 to 14 years of age. It was considered a good practice. It was supposed to be good for the kids to learn from someone other than their parents. It was, in practice, a very, very difficult and miserable experience for the kids themselves, according to some records we have of kids that wrote about their experience. It was pretty miserable. But the idea was that you went to school, and then it was more common to go about age 14. They would apprentice the kids out, and they would go off and learn a trade or work with another family. I have no idea if Shakespeare followed this practice or not. I do know that modern research thinks that he went to school in Stratford, and it was extensive. So it was, I forget exactly how many hours a day it was, but it was definitely all day, and it's longer than the 8-hour day we have here in the States today for kids. They didn't, today kids here go from school from like 8 a.m. to 3:30. And in Shakespeare's time, he would still be in school at 4, 5, and 6 in the evening. So it was a long day, and he spent most of it learning Greek and Latin and how to translate Greek and Latin to English. And he was very familiar with stories and how to write stories and how to tell stories. And so he was very well versed in writing and telling the stories that he would go on to make a career out of as a playwright. So to me, I've been watching the show Will, and I was really surprised. In it, they said, first of all, they make way too much of the whole Anne Burbage thing. That's, to me, ridiculous. But of course, we don't know, so they get to take that creative license, and that's part of the fun of it. So I commend them for being artistic. It's just not maybe my cup of tea. So anyway, another part that they tell in there is Shakespeare makes the statement to Robert Greene. He says, "Well, I'm a glove maker by trade," and I found that really surprising. John Shakespeare was a glove maker. That was his job. And at their house in Stratford-upon-Avon, his house was also his office. It was his point of business. And so it doubled up. So certainly Shakespeare would have been around and involved and likely helping his father in some capacity, but I don't know that there's any real evidence to suggest he apprenticed with his father as a glove maker. And I think it's a stretch from what I can research. Now, please tell me if you know differently, but from what I can find, it seems to be a stretch to suggest that Shakespeare identified himself as a glove maker. From what I can tell, in 1582 was the Lord Strange's Men's first performance at court. And they're known for performing plays that Shakespeare wrote. So by like 1592, I believe it is, 1582 was when 1582 was when the Lord Strange's Men first performed at court. And they are considered to be the first group of players that employed Shakespeare. And he came on first as an actor, and then he would build up his credibility to where he was writing for them. And Titus Andronicus is considered his first play, and it was written round about 1592. Now, please, if you are an academic watching this, don't skewer me for assigning that timetable to Titus Andronicus, because that's another point of confusion, I guess, or doubt among researchers, is whether or not Shakespeare's play was actually written in that year. Titus Andronicus's actual written date is questionable. No one knows exactly when he wrote it. And I'm sorry, my eyes are diverting away from the video because I'm over here. I wrote it down. I wrote myself a guide, but I don't have quick access to it, so I won't put that up for this video. Basically, the date that Shakespeare wrote Titus Andronicus is a guess. Best guesses all place it within the last decade of the 16th century. So somewhere between 1580 and 1600 is when, then that's 2 decades, sorry. But somewhere in there is when Shakespeare wrote Titus Andronicus. So to my mind, he would have been 18 years old in 1582. And if he was apprenticed out at 14, that's a pretty fast turnaround to go from being a glove maker's apprentice to, you know, working as a playwright. So I think it's probably more likely that he did not get apprenticed out, because by 18, he's already married to Anne Hathaway. And so I think it's more likely that he didn't get apprenticed out. Instead, he either worked for his father until he was old enough to go become a playwright, or he just immediately moved into going and working at one of the various playing troupes or playhouses that were there. And there were a lot of them. There were a lot of groups that were performing and playing. The Rose Theatre and the Theatre were both in London at the time. And like I said, his education was built all around telling stories. So he knew a lot about writing and telling stories. He was obviously passionate about this. He would go on to pursue this profession through things like plague and the getting shut down. He dealt with courtiers, he dealt with royalty, and he was hugely passionate about this. He felt that this was his calling from a very young age. And so I want to suggest that if you're watching the Will show, I wouldn't take it to heart, the reference to him being a glove maker. I don't think William Shakespeare ever identified as being a glove maker that I can find. So that my caveat is, if you know differently, please send it to me. I'd love to read about that. But what I can find is, while it was common practice for kids to finish school and then apprentice out from their families, Shakespeare either did not do that, or when he came old enough to go out and apprentice out, he went and apprenticed with a playwright, because that was what he wanted to do from the beginning. Obviously, from the records that we have about Shakespeare throughout his life, he overcame lots of obstacles to pursue that as a career. So if he was apprenticed as something else, it was a very, very short period of time. And from what I can learn, I don't think he did it at all, because we know that he got married to Anne Hathaway at 18. So that's kind of when the firm records about his life we know from then forward. So anyway, but interesting little tidbit that Titus Andronicus was his first play, and his first job acting that we have on record is credited to the Lord Strange's Men. That's a little fuzzy as well, but he is on record with Lord Strange's Men. And there is a wonderful group called READ. That's an acronym, and you can read about them. I'm going to put the link in the show notes to this, but they catalog the locations of the playing troupes, what they performed, where, and on what date. And they have a huge database online, which is fascinating. And you can look up where Shakespeare was and when he was performing, if you know which groups that he was performing with. For instance, he was performing with the Lord Chamberlain's Men. And if you click on that in this database, it'll show you that George Carey was the patron and where they performed and what they performed. So it's neat to kind of watch Shakespeare develop as a playwright in researching this. And I will put lots of links to where you can explore this topic further. But the short answer to the question of, did Shakespeare have a first job? I'm going to say that yes, he did. Best we can tell, his first job was being an actor. He acted with the Lord Strange's Men, and that's credited as being the first reference to Shakespeare working in theater. So there you are. That Shakespeare knew what he wanted to be from a very young age and pursued it fiercely. And we can all learn a lot of lessons from that. So thank you for joining me this week at That Shakespeare Girl. Please like and subscribe to this channel as well as this video. Let me know that you like it. If you enjoy Shakespeare as much as I do and you want to dive deeper into the journey, please consider becoming a member at That Shakespeare Girl. If you go to patreon.com/That Shakespeare Girl, you can get all kinds of freebies like calendars and cards and swag and all kinds of Shakespeare goodies that are only available to members. I pour a lot into supporting you guys because I love studying Shakespeare and I love having you studying him right along with me. So there are all kinds of freebies in there. Be sure to check that out as well. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, so if you want to talk to me, that's a great place to do it. And I will see you guys next week when we explore the next Did Shakespeare question. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.